More and more there is talk of the United States descending into civil war. Is there any truth to this? And if so, why? Watch on to find out. Hi, I'm Ryan F. Gassian, and the short answer to that question is yes. We could very well see a civil war in the United States within the next 10 to 15 years. One of the reasons is that America is growing increasingly more partisan. There was a time when politicians in both parties would sit down and hash out deals. That rarely happens these days. The reason is money. Since the 1976 Buckley v. Valeo case, it's become unconstitutional for Congress to place any limits on how much money can be spent on an election. This has made running a successful campaign very expensive, and thus the more successful politicians are those who can fundraise the most. But to do this, they must pander to their donors rather than to their constituents. Big donors tend to be more partisan. The best example are the Koch brothers. These two billionaires inherited their father's massive oil empire, Koch Industries. They are for small government and lower taxes, and have spent billions of dollars over the years to get their policies enacted. They are close to passing their crown jewel, the Balanced Budget Amendment, into law. The Balanced Budget Amendment is just what it sounds. If made law, Congress will be required to pass only budgets that are funded solely by tax revenue collected by the government. It cannot borrow or print more money to pay for them. Now, you might be thinking that this is a good thing. After all, the average American must work under a budget. Why shouldn't Congress? The reason is Congress is responsible for running a country, not a household. It couldn't draw in enough revenue to prepare for every scenario that might arise. For example, the damage done by Hurricane Harvey is estimated to be around $150 billion. If the Balanced Budget Amendment were already in effect, there wouldn't be enough money to rebuild Houston. Being unprepared to face natural disasters isn't the only concern. Currently, Congress runs a deficit. If the Balanced Budget Amendment was to be enacted tomorrow, it would have to slash at least $500 billion of spending. Given its current makeup, you can bet most cuts would be made to programs like Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. This would push millions of Americans below the poverty line and drive hundreds of thousands into bankruptcy. The economy would begin to slow down. The social unrest generated by this would only further strain the government's coffers. State governments, which are even more prone to running up deficits, would also now be required to pass balanced budgets. Many, particularly the more liberal and successful states, like California and New York, would come to see little point in remaining in the Union and leave. If they did, the economies in the less prosperous states, like Alabama and Mississippi, would collapse because they depend on money transfers from the bigger states to survive. Fearing this, the federal government would have no choice but to invade to stop them. This would trigger a civil war. How bad things would get is hard to say. It all depends on what kind of military assets the bigger states leave with. If it's a paltry force, then the civil war would end swiftly and with few casualties. However, if they retain a sizable force, then they could hold off the federal government for a time, even win. Remember, the federal government will be hamstrung by having to pass a balanced budget, whereas the departing states will no longer be under such constraints. They could borrow money to keep their forces equipped, whereas the federal government would quickly run out of funds. Given the current system, it is not a question of if the balanced budget will be passed, but when. I fear America's end might come sooner than anyone realizes. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button below and subscribe. Oh, and please visit my website at www.darknessinamerica.com, where you can read short stories that take place before my upcoming sci-fi novel, Darkness in America. In the future, the United States befalls a dark age, where its citizens live in fear of the Inquisitors, telepathic assassins who police the populace for thought crimes. Again, thank you for listening, and in the immortal words of Mr. Spock, live long and prosper.